Welcome to another change-making conversation from Baptist News Global. You're listening to a special podcast series titled Highest Power, Church and State, featuring writer, poet, and musician Rick Pidcock. Now here's Rick.
The church is supposed to direct the government. The government is not supposed to direct the church. That is not how our founding fathers intended it. And I'm tired of this separation of church and state junk that's not in the Constitution. It was in a stinking letter, and it means nothing like what they say it does.
One statement I've heard the most among Christian nationalists is that the government is not supposed to direct the church, but that the church is supposed to direct the government. It's typically a statement that is used to dismiss the separation of church and state as a myth. For Christian nationalists and Christian supremacists, it sounds nice because it gives them all the power with no accountability. They get to tell the government what to do, but nobody can tell them what to do. We've observed this privilege over the past year through stories like the Pentagon worship services that have spread into other departments too. No other group is being given opportunities and access to those in the highest positions of power like this. We're also seeing it in these U.S. government-sponsored revival services like the Freedom 250 event on the National Mall to rededicate the United States to being one nation under God. Again, that event was dominated not simply by Christians, but by a particular kind of Christian that is loyal to Donald Trump and to particular theological scripts about men and women. If you're anyone else, you're not included. In the same way, persecution gets defined as being something that happens only to the particular approved groups. We've seen this through Trump's task force against anti-Christian bias. They're not at all concerned about bias against moderate or progressive Christians. They couldn't care less about Muslims. It's only about a particular kind of Christian that is loyal to Donald Trump and to particular theological scripts about men and women. And even then, they interpret the data through paranoia and a persecution complex. This particular kind of Christian privilege is on full display this week through two different stories. One is through Pete Hegseth's shrinking of the military's recognized religions from over 200 groups to just 31. And the other story is through the Trump administration's firing of FBI analysts accused of anti-Catholic bias. Today, we're going to look at the story of the military's recognized religions. Here's Pete Hegseth.
As I reported to you in December, in previous administrations, our chaplain corps was infected by political correctness and secular humanism. The core functions of the chaplain corps were changed and watered down until they were viewed by many as nothing more than therapists. Faith and virtue were traded for self-help and self-care. We started correcting that drift then, and today we're going further. The crucible of combat tests more than the body. It tests conviction, character, and spirit. The military's chaplain corps serves as the spiritual and moral backbone of our nation's armed forces. Chaplains help forge spiritual readiness across the force. And that matters because in combat, in crisis, and in loss, a warfighter needs more than a coping mechanism. They need truth, big T truth. They need conviction. They need a shepherd. And as I've said before, spiritual health is equally important to a service member's physical and emotional health. This update is part of our efforts to return the chaplain corps to its core mission of serving the spiritual needs of our warfighters, 82% of whom identify as being religious. Today, I want to update you on two reforms we are undertaking to further make sure we're making the chaplain corps great again. In December, I told you that we were going to revamp the military's current faith and belief coding system, renaming it the Religious Affiliation Codes. The previous system had ballooned to well over 200 faith codes, 200. It was impractical and unusable, and many codes were never used at all. An overwhelming majority of the military population used only 6 of the codes. Our internal review committee recommended that going forward, the department use 31 religious affiliation codes. This brings the codes in line with its original purpose, giving chaplains clear, usable information so they can minister to service members in a way that aligns with that service member's faith background and religious practice.
In a memorandum dated May 20th, 2026, the Pentagon wrote, "This memorandum directs the implementation of updated and consolidated religious affiliation codes across the Department of War, as directed by the Secretary of War. This action will streamline the Department of War collection of religious preferences selection for service members to enhance the delivery of targeted religious support from the chaplaincy. The attached list of religious affiliation codes replaces the Department of War's previous faith and belief codes and will be used exclusively to inform Department of War's provision of religious support activities." You may recall back in December, I wrote a piece titled "Hegseth Plans Cultural Shift for Military Chaplains," where he first talked about making the chaplaincy great again. To accomplish that, he promised to get rid of the Army Spiritual Fitness Guide because it included such supposedly New Age ideas as discussions of consciousness, creativity, and connection. He also didn't like how it utilized art and playfulness as therapy strategies. And he promised to streamline the faith and belief codes, which is a coding system the military uses to identify soldiers' religious affiliation so they can provide chaplains that can serve their soldiers more effectively. The memorandum went on to say, "The new religious affiliation codes list will provide chaplains with clear, readily available information that will better enable them to anticipate the religious support needs of service members and to provide religious support activities that align with service members' personal faith and practices." But if it's giving clear, readily available information to chaplains in order to provide religious support activities that align with service members' personal faith and practice, then you'd think the guiding factor would be the service member's personal faith and practice. Otherwise, whatever information and activities they create would be a top-down plan given to the service members by people who may not understand their personal faith and practices. Also, you'd think more information would be good. For example, identifying as a Christian is one thing, but there's so much more variety here. Even in the Christian nationalist world, there are independent charismatics, Baptists, non-denominational Christians, Catholics, and that doesn't even include the CREC group Pete Hegseth is a part of. A Southern Baptist service member is not likely to find that much spiritual sustenance from a Paul White, and a charismatic Christian is probably not going to appreciate being shepherded by a Southern Baptist Al Mohler type. So by having more information in the system, the military can be far more effective in providing spiritual care that resonates with each particular service member. But that's not what's going on here. Hegseth has taken out the information and reduced it drastically. Hemant Mehta of The Friendly Atheist wrote in a piece about the story, quote, "Before 2014, there were a limited number of faith codes you could use to describe yourself. They included Muslim, Hindu, Wiccan, Jewish, Buddhist, or one of more than 100 Christian denominations. But non-religious soldiers could only choose from atheist or no religious preference. After 2014, the list was expanded to include humanist, a hard-fought win that was years in the making. In 2017, the list was expanded again to include even more specific non-religious categories like heathen, deism, and no preference, and no religion. Again, the goal was accuracy. There was finally an understanding that the spectrum of non-religious thought wasn't as simple as saying, 'I'm not.' Much like there are many denominations of Christianity, each of which has meaning for people who belong to those groups, there are non-religious people who believe humanist or deist or agnostic more accurately describes who they are and what they believe," unquote. But now, according to the memo, the list has been narrowed all the way down to 31 groups, 21 of whom are listed as Christian. Mehta points out, quote, "If you're an atheist, like I am, the only sensible category would be no religion. What about people who no longer buy into organized religion but still think there is a higher power somewhere up there? They would also be listed under no religion. What about people who never think about religion at all? No religion. It's a catch-all term that erases open atheists from the military by lumping them in with people who don't share their views at all," unquote. It's also ironic because even specific groups of Christians have a lot of variety. For example, it's not simply enough to say you're Christian, or even Baptist for that matter. Look at what's going on this week in the Baptist world. Southern Baptists are voting once again to try to prohibit women from preaching. On the other hand, many of the readers of Baptist News Global are affirming of LGBTQ people. So even specifying Baptist isn't enough. Quite frankly, if you're a female service member in the military who is also a member of a Baptist church who believes in women pastors, you're probably not going to want to be helped by a male Southern Baptist chaplain who doesn't think you should have a voice in your spiritual community simply because you're a woman. But apparently, this level of nuance doesn't seem to cross Hegseth's mind. This is the extent of Hegseth's knowledge of the complexities of religion. And ultimately, that points to perhaps the most concerning thing going on here. By shortening the list down to 31, with 21 of the groups being Christian, the U.S. government is now defining who counts as Christian. For example, the list of codes includes Assemblies of God, Baptist, Brethren, Catholic, Church of Christ, Church of God, Church of the Nazarene, Episcopal, Anglican, etc. But after the list of Christian denominations, it lists Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints among the non-Christian categories. And Mormons are not happy about it. So Utah's Republican senators are speaking out. Senator John Curtis wrote on X, "Latter-day Saints are among the most patriotic, service-oriented individuals in our country. They are also unequivocally Christian. Just look at who is in the name of the church. It is unacceptable for a government entity to characterize a faith in a manner that contradicts the religion's own foundational tenets. I'm working now to ensure a correction is made," unquote. Senator Mike Lee asked, "Can anyone tell me why the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints was left out of the list of Christian churches?"
The faith of the American people has always been one of its greatest strengths, as is the fact that the Constitution prohibits the United States government from treating people differently based on their religious beliefs, regardless of what denomination they might be drawn toward, they might belong to, or whether they have any faith at all. It's one of the many things that has strengthened our country, and it's especially important in this circumstance that the government recognize the faith of the men and women who serve in uniform and stand ready, willing, and able to die at any moment as they serve our country in times of war. For that very reason, I think it's very unfortunate that the Pentagon has chosen to identify basically every faith group in America that professes faith in Jesus Christ as Christian, with one exception. That is those belonging to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I find this offensive, not just because that happens to be my faith, but not just because it happens to be the faith of tens of thousands of U.S. military personnel, but it's also just repugnant to any sense of decency, any sense of our common heritage and our common belief that the government needs to not weigh in on doctrinal disputes between various religious denominations. And so I respectfully am imploring people at the Pentagon to reconsider this. Not just reconsider it, but undo it. Secretary Hegseth, tear down that wall. This is not cool. Get rid of it. Get rid of it now. Thank you.
And Representative Mike Kennedy added, "I'm a Latter-day Saint, and I am a Christian. Christ's name is on our church for a reason. This must be corrected." Of course, having Jesus' name in your church name doesn't mean you're actually promoting the teachings of Jesus. And I'm not an apologist for the Mormon Church. I think a lot of Mormon theology is harmful, untrue, and doesn't align with what I understand the Bible to be promoting or even pointing toward. And though I've covered Mormonism to some degree in a few stories here and there, I tend not to focus on it because it's not my area of expertise like white evangelicalism is. Of course, I recognize how the Mormon view of salvation is different from white evangelicalism's view of salvation. But I don't know that it's any more problematic or harmful than white evangelicalism's dominant views of salvation, which I critique all the time in my writing and on this podcast. Because I don't think white evangelicalism is any more in line with Jesus' teaching than Mormonism is. But whether or not I personally consider Mormonism or evangelicalism to be truly Christian would be irrelevant if I were to be nominated to lead the Department of Defense. The reality is that it's not the role of the Secretary of Defense to determine who is and isn't Christian. And that gets to the underlying problem with this whole Christian nationalist narrative that dismisses the separation of church and state. They say the government can't direct the church, but that the church can direct the government. But what that line of reasoning effectively does is that it makes the church the government. And then whatever particular church has members in charge of the government gets to define what is true Christianity. No matter how much you disagree with Mormonism, or with any religious group for that matter, do you really want the US government defining religion and defining who counts or not? Because when you have a particular group of religious people like Hegseth running the government and defining those terms, then their ignorance and biases become the standard through which service members receive pastoral care, and through which anti-religious bias gets filtered. And that anti-religious bias piece is what I'm planning to discuss in our next episode. But that's it for today. Thank you so much for listening. Please like, subscribe, and rate us on your favorite podcast platform, and we'll be back with another episode on Thursday.
This has been another change-making conversation from Baptist News Global. The episode you've just heard is part of a special podcast series titled Highest Power, Church and State. Be sure to follow BNG daily at baptistnews.com and subscribe to get notifications about future episodes. Baptist News Global is a national nonprofit news service that is independent, free, and faithful. BNG is supported by readers and listeners like you. Learn more at baptistnews.com.
This episode was produced and edited by Mac Bowles of TKG Communications, LLC, Dallas, Texas.